What's up, everybody? Welcome back to, I guess, the channel. I guess we're going to try something new today. We're going to try to go live on 3 different channels. I have a Facebook profile where my personal friends are. I have a Facebook page that I sometimes engage with. I actually kind of want to put things like this more on the Facebook page, but currently more engagement happens on the Facebook profile than on the Facebook page. And we have a YouTube channel that we are trying to build as well. And so we're going to try to do this everywhere, which is kind of a thing. So we're going to see how this works. I'm going to try sharing the screen. Actually, let me see if I can get. I'm going to put my little name up there where you guys can see that. Yeah, so today what we're going to do, because I don't have time anymore to do a whole lot of editing, I want to do a lot of these sort of live things and try to do things in real time. But we have it's brought to my attention that Frank Turek covered had a long form video for social justice and CRT as it relates to Christianity. And I know Frank is a good apologist and good thinker, and I appreciate a lot of the work that he does. And so I'm curious to see what he comes up with where it pertains to CRT, and particularly not so much CRT as much as just the general social justice conversation, and whether or not he is going to sort of fall into the same sort of what I've found to be some of the trappings of this conversation. I'm hoping that he isn't. I have the video here, and I'm only going to play a snippet of it. As a matter of fact, let me see if I can pop up the. Let me see. Do I have the link? Let me see. I had the link. Let me see if I can grab the link, and I'll just give you guys the YouTube link. It should be in the description of this, where you can go see the whole thing, right? I want you to be able to see the whole thing. But we're gonna listen to some of this video, particularly around. Looks like he's about to try to define social justice. Again, the video is done really well. He's kind of got the bookmarks there, the chapters marked there, and we are going to see what he has to say. Now, again, I like Frank, so I don't come into this with any animosity toward Frank, and or anything like that. So you know, I just want to know what he's got to say, and then we'll see if it comports with the way that I particularly pursue social justice, and why it's important to me as a Christian, and where CRT plays into that, if it plays into it at all. So with no further ado, let's begin. Let me see. I'm going to get him all the way set here. And hopefully you guys can comment and all that stuff if you want to. I'd love to get your comments. I'll try to respond to them. If you're here, then I want to know if if you hear the video. That's going to be the first thing I want to know is, can you hear the video? Because when I started, he can't post comments to some. Okay. All right. So here we go. We're going to jump in.
What is justice and social justice? Justice normally means individuals getting what they deserve, an impartial and fair application of the law.
Okay. So I'm going to pause right there because I think immediately we have a difference in our definition of justice. Frank, while that definition, I would say that that's a secondary version of how I view justice. In other words, that may be a way justice is carried out, but the concept of justice, the definition of justice, by my understanding, justice is about things operating in the way it is meant to operate, or something performing the way it's meant to perform, or doing what it is meant to do. That which is just, or that which is when one is experiencing justice or living out justice, or pursuing justice, what they are living out, experiencing, pursuing is that ideal, purposeful thing that is that ideal purposeful thing. I said it before, when we talk about doing a song justice, what we're saying is that we heard the song the way it was meant to be heard. When we talk about someone playing or the game of basketball the right kind of way and doing the game of basketball justice, when someone creates a computer or a software and it runs the way it's supposed to run, the way it's intended to run, the way the creator of that thing intended it to run, you say that thing is just, or that thing is operating justly, or it is, what you're watching is a kind of justice. When God created the world and he said all things were good, all things were just, all things were harmonious, everything was where it should be, doing what it should be doing, nothing was not doing what it should be doing. And so justice as a concept already for me has less to do with resources. Already we get the hint that this is about to be about resources, because we're talking about what one deserves and what one doesn't deserve. I'm going to suspect that he's going to bring this into a resource conversation. Justice is about more than resources. Justice is about a thing living into its ideal state, its purposeful, intended state. And so when someone says, I want justice in society, what they're saying is, I want to pursue the society that we all intend it to be. I want society to reflect what it should do and not what it shouldn't do. And whenever we notice things in society where it should not, things that are happening in society that shouldn't, the pursuit of social justice is to correct those things that are hindering that sort of justice. That's where the law comes in. That's where penalties and jails and all those things come in. All those things are designed to either separate from those things which have chosen to not live justly, or to compel those things which have not lived justly to live justly in our justice society, right? So we create something in the context of what we're talking about here. So justice is things being the way it should be, right? And then social justice then becomes, how do we look at society and help it be the thing that it's meant to be? When you think about America, for instance, America, land of the free, home of the brave, all men are created equal, right? And we have this ideal picture that the Constitution paints now of rights and opportunities and anti-discrimination and equality and freedom. And those are the ideals. There is a justice. There is a way we're supposed to be as a country. And then you look at the way the country is and you say, do we live up to that ideal? Are we doing the American ideal justice in the same way that Whitney Houston might do the song justice? How are we doing the American ideal justice? If we are not, then we begin to look at it and say, okay, these are the places where I don't think we are lining up to the ideal. Therefore, we're not being just. And we want to correct those things. Social justice, social justice is about those things, right? So that's what social justice is. Right? It's about the correcting and the putting together of things the way that it's supposed to be. Well, that's what justice is in general. And then you can apply that concept across the board. So when he says justice is about people getting what they deserve, well, that's a secondary definition in my mind to what justice really is, which is that things are meant to be put where they are supposed to be. And so that's where that is. I hope that makes sense. All right. And you may disagree with that, but I disagree. But not CRT, justice is how I think about justice. One more before we go on. There's a relationship between that which is just, that which is good, that which is right. Right. We know these terms. When you say, hey, someone who lives justly, lives rightly, lives good, what that means is they live appropriately. They live the way they should. That which is unjust, is wrong, is sinful, has missed the mark. So the relationship between just and unjust has not to do with one getting what they deserve, but has a much greater goal of bringing things into proper space and alignment, into the proper harmony and beauty within which God created humanity. But even in a given system or created thing, like say like the American nation, there's a way that America has ideally pictured itself, and that would be justice. So less to do with what he's talking about. These things that he's talking about are in service, potentially to helping create that ideal.
Right? You get what you deserve.
My man said he's
By the way,
right.
there's a difference between justice, mercy, and grace. None of us should demand justice. Why? Not from God anyway. Why? Because then we're going to get what we deserve. And we don't want that.
Okay, so I don't disagree. Obviously, I don't disagree with that. And yet at the same time, in the concept of we don't get to demand justice in the sense using the definition he's using, which is that you get what you deserve. But this pursuit of doing and being what we ought to do and be, once we realize that we're sinners, we say, well, how do I become not a sinner? Once we realize that we're unjust, then you say, well, how do I become just? How do I live into that which I'm supposed to do instead of doing the things I don't do? And the law comes and says, well, here's what you're supposed to do, right? And so this is what you should be living up to, but you can't do that. That's what Paul talks about. He says it's a schoolmaster, it's a teacher. It shows us what we ought to do, but then shows us that we can't do it. And then that's where the grace of God comes and says the pathway to justice, the pathway to that which is ideal, to the way you are meant to be, is not by your own effort, but through Christ. And in that sense, we do get to pursue justice. We do look to God to say, hey, God, how do I get from where I am, which is in an unjust state, to where I want to be, which is a just state? And God says, listen, I've sent my son to show you and to do that for you. And here's the pathway. And then there's the gospel. But this concept, this view of justice, the opposite of justice is not necessarily grace. The opposite of justice is unjust, is injustice. The opposite of right is wrong. The opposite of that which is just is that which is unjust. The opposite of that which is good is that which is bad. Do you understand the connection? Justice is bigger than wrath and judgment and discipline. It is a part of justice, but that discipline is designed to move things from the unjust state, the state of injustice, to the state of just state, or the state of justice. And so the reaping and sowing is a part of what justice is, but not the totality of what justice is. Justice, I'm gonna say it, and I'm gonna move on from it. Justice is about things being the way they should be. That is what justice is. Okay.
Mercy is not getting what you deserve, and grace is getting what you don't deserve. And none of us deserve grace. It's a gift.
I'll have to spend more time.
Right? Anyway, this is
with that. That's not what this video is about.
I think of justice.
So I have to spend more time with that.
Social justice might be something like taking action to care for the poor, orphans, widows, unborn. In fact, this phrase was coined by a Catholic priest a couple of centuries ago.
Okay, so social justice, the way he just described as social justice, is really just charity, taking care of the poor and the list that he gave there. That's being nice. That's caring for other people. Again, and that works with this. Regardless as to whether the Catholic, whoever coined the phrase, and it's not a proper noun, by the way. Social justice is not a proper noun. It's a adjective and a noun. So it's trying to describe where the justice, this concept of, for me, this concept of everything being the way they should be. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about society, and there's more to a just society than caring for the poor and all of those things. Charity is a part of that, but the pursuit of the ideal society, if you will, the American idea, has to ask the question: what does America want to do with the poor? What does the Constitution say about the poor? And is the state of poverty the product of unjust means or just means? Is it the product of injustice or justice? Meaning, um, America may have poor people in it, but are those poor people poor because we have not lived up to our ideal? And if they are, then we should look at those places and deal with where that is and deal with the ideal. We've done that already in history. We've done that in the past with poverty, with race, and with many things. Where we looked at something, we said, that's not who we want to be. Therefore, we're going to make this change in order to try to be who we want to be, to do the American dream justice, or do the American idea justice, right? So this critical evaluation of where we are right now in relationship to where we say we want to be, the ideal, the justice picture, is the process. To make social justice simply acts of charity, which is how he's positioning this, is to vastly under challenge the view of justice, is to vastly miss the broader concept of what it means to be a just nation according to our own constitutional standard, right? So it's more than simple charity, just for charity's sake. It's more than that. And I think to nail social justice down to be just kind acts, it's kind of like nailing parenting down to just providing dinner for your children, as opposed to a far greater ideal. Sure, it includes providing dinner for your children, but the concept of parenting is broader than that, is bigger than that. Social justice is a broader concept. This idea of pursuing social appropriateness, social rightness, the ideal social standard. That is what American and social justice is supposed to be about. It's less about it. Again, charity is a part of it, but it doesn't define social justice. To say it this way is to lean it into an individualist point of view that says, I can be charitable, therefore I can contribute to social justice, as opposed to a corporate social way to think about it, which is to say, how does our society look? A society is made up of more than one individual. How does our society look? And what does the collective social idealization match up to? How does that match up to the realization of where we actually are? So right away, we got individuals getting what they deserve, which I disagree with as a definition of justice. Individuals getting what they deserve is just individuals getting what they deserve. Justice is a far greater ambition than simply people getting what they deserve. And social justice, being taking care of the poor, orphans, widows, and unborn, is much more than that as well. It is the pursuit of things being where they ought to be socially, which includes dealing with the poor, but not simply that.
Social justice. Let's make sure that we're involved in the community and make sure we care for the people that need to be cared for. And the Bible talks a fair amount about this, as you know. Okay.
I love that he says, make sure, does lead a kind of responsibility on the church.
Oppressed groups must be liberated.
Okay, so here we are. So now he's entering in. He says, or, so his presentation is already preparing us. Hey, this is the right way to think about this, charity. The wrong way to think about this is oppressed groups must be liberated. Now, I'm sure he'll get into it, so I'll wait for him.
Now, this,
go where he's going.
Unfortunately, is what the meaning is for many people today.
Okay, so I think oppression is not a four-letter word. The Bible uses oppression. Oppression is a thing. Whether America is an oppressed, has the dynamic of oppression or oppressed or oppressed, oppressing or oppressor. What am I trying to say? Hold on. Whether America has oppression in it, um, is a subject of discussion. But let's not act like the presence of oppressed groups in a society is an abnormality. Throughout Scripture, and just throughout human society, there has been people who are part of groups that have been oppressed, and that language is regular and often in the scriptures to describe oppression. So the word oppression didn't begin with Karl Marx, and so when someone talks about oppression in a society, it doesn't doesn't necessarily mean that they are referring to Marxism. They're just simply looking at society and saying that, hey, there seems to be a power differential in this a power and influence differential between between groups in this particular context. And if one is exploitative or extortionist or taking advantage of the other, then you call that oppression. Oppression simply means to hold down. That's what oppression means. It is to press down. It's to hold down, rather. It's to oppress is to not allow one up, right? So it's like, I'm going to keep you in this state. Oppression doesn't mean that you're being mistreated all the time, or that you are being lynched, or that there's these really ugly, negative actions. Oppression, by definition, again, is simple that, hey, you have a role and space in society that you should not elevate beyond. And if you get above this particular space, you have risen too high and we have to press you back down. That's what oppression is. It doesn't see everything as equal playing field, but it does see certain things in their place, and those who are low can't get high. So oppressed groups is a normal thing. We don't need to feel like by saying the word oppression or oppressed groups that somehow you've bought into some Karl Marx way of worldview thinking. Oppressed groups is a normal thing. And then oppressed groups should be liberated or freed from their hold down is a concept that we can get our heads wrapped around. We do this. America has engaged in this throughout history. We did this with Saddam Hussein. We're like, hey, man, Saddam Hussein has a repressive and oppressive tyrannical regime where he holds his people down, and in his case, treated them certain types of really extreme negative ways. We want to free those oppressed people, and by eliminating this leader. And the goal to democratize the world, in a sense, is this goal, or was this goal in American history. Maybe we're less doing that these days. But for a moment there in America, we were all about going to societies that were experiencing oppression in order to liberate them. And in that sense, what we were saying is there's a way that society is supposed to run. That's not the way it's supposed to run. We're going to bring social justice to that scenario so that they will experience liberation into a just way to live. So terms like oppressed, terms like liberation, these are not terms that need to be solely attached to Marxian ideas. These are just general terms that just have the definition that they have. And so his list here, oppressed groups must be liberated. I would say social justice includes both taking care of the poor, orphans, widows, and unborn, as well as determining if there are oppressed groups in a given scenario, oppressed by the definition of that nation's standard, and if those oppressed groups are not meant to be oppressed, to free them from that oppression. That would be a part of social justice as well, as we move toward this ideal situation.
Not that we shouldn't liberate oppressed groups.
Good. I'm glad you agree with that.
The idea that we're caring for poor and the orphans, and this is sort of subsumed by this. That's why the people who really study this say, if you want to be clear, don't use the phrase social justice, because it means too many different things to too many different people.
The reason it means too many different things to too many people is because most people don't hear. What I've experienced in my conversations is that people are changing the definition of what social justice is to some academic ivory tower definition that they found in some intellectual study book, as opposed to listening to the people telling you what their issue is and letting them tell you what they mean by social justice, by lowercase s, lowercase j, social justice. In other words, we're treating social justice as though it were a proper noun that had a fixed definition, when in reality, people are using social justice as two separate words, an adjective and a noun, designed to get you to think about what people are experiencing in society. So the difference in this conversation has to do with whether someone's trying to operate from a defined, fixed definition of social justice, of which no one has ever created, except Webster's dictionary, which and then they change it to be whatever it is that they disagree with. This is where the straw man arguments start to come, right? And they start to bring in these things that isn't what people are actually talking about.
Define what you mean by it. In fact, oppressed groups must be liberated might mean that we're going to take from the haves and give to the have-nots.
Okay, and so he's going to fall for the same trope. So now social justice, listen, I'm just going to walk through the social justice has just moved. Social justice has just moved from the experience of oppression to the redistribution of resources. That's what he just said. He said to take from the haves and give to the have-nots. This is the subtle shift in the conversation about social justice every time. We start with, my rights were violated, my opportunities were thwarted, my experiences, I had an unjust experience, and it gets moved to, you just want my stuff. You want to take my things and give it to other people. And the person's like, no, not necessarily right now. I just don't want to be treated differently. I don't want my opportunities to be different. I don't want my experiences to be different. I don't want my rights to be different based on my gender, race, whatever the thing might be. In other words, I'm talking about an experience. You're talking about resources. I'm talking about how you treat me. You're talking about what you do with your money. And the fact that you can't think beyond the money piece, the resource piece. The only thing you can think about when you hear social justice is resources, tells me that, well, let me slow down. Could be indicative that money is way too important to you, that the fear of losing what you believe you've earned is more important than understanding what the actual conversation's about. Social justice is not about taking your money. If my son were to get stopped by a police officer, a white police officer, and he called him an N-word and shot him, right? And it got caught on video, and it was very clear that he did it because he was racist. And I were to get on the news and I would say, I want justice for my son. I'm not asking for money. What am I asking for when I say I want justice for my son? What I'm asking for is for the system to account for the violation of his rights, opportunities, and experience. And I want them to say, hey, that is not the way we're supposed to be. That is not just. Therefore, I want the penalty that communicates to the rest of society that we are not a society that accepts this as what is just and good. We are a society who will pursue this other ideal of just and good. And we're going to penalize people who violate those experiences. Nowhere in there is there conversation about money. Nowhere in there is there conversation about me moving what's in your bank account to my bank account. We're talking about my experiences, my rights, and my opportunities. And when these conversations change the subject from the experiences to the money, then it makes it really easy to bleed into socialism, Marxism, and all of those things. And this is where the problem is. You say, well, how do you deal with the poor, Antoine, if you don't deal with people's money? I say, and how do you make things right? How do you deal with justice? Lots of ways, right? But I would contend that most of the people, there's a section of the conversation that's talk about reparations, but that's not the entirety of social justice. Most people, especially nowadays, simply want to have a fair shot at being stopped by a police officer without being shot, submitting their mortgage without having their race factor into the decision about that mortgage, applying for a job without having that the type of name that they have affect whether they can get the job or not. These are the things that we're talking about. These are the things that we're talking about.
Law. Do you realize that so much of what you hear in the media is actually sounding good, even though the real meaning behind what they're promoting isn't good?
Okay, so what he's saying is, I'm going to guess that what he's about to say is that people are going to use terms like equality, freedom, basic good terms, but what they really want is to take your resources and redistribute them. And so he's saying those are codified words to say, give me what's yours. And he's going to say that's what social justice is about. And not only is he wrong about that, but it's an offensive thing for him to say.
We talked about this morning, for those of you who were in church, for those of you who weren't in church, where were you?
Let's see if I'm right about that.
We talked about how Satan comes as an angel of light.
Okay.
That if you want to pass off something bad as good, give it a good name.
Okay, here we are.
Call it the Equality Act.
There it is. There's the good name.
Sounds so good. Who could be against equality? Yeah. Call it choice. Who could be against choice? Everybody's for choice. Call it justice. We're all for justice. Call it fairness. Who's not for fairness? But when you really drill down as to what they're promoting, it's not just, it's not fair, it's not equality, and it's not a choice we should make. So, this is a pretty good book on this topic by Scott David Allen, Why Social Justice is Not Biblical Justice. Here's the way he puts it.
Okay, he's about to talk about resources.
Social justice today, secular social justice. Deconstructing traditional systems and structures deemed to be oppressive and redistributing power and resources from oppressors to their victims in the pursuit of equality of outcome.
Oh, wow. So we are doing a lot of things here. So I told you what was coming, and there it is. He was going to say that, hey, they're going to use these terms that you agree with to try to get your money. And now he's quoting this book that is saying that social justice is about the oppressor and the oppressed, and the oppressed wanting to redistribute the income, the resources of the oppressor. And so social justice is not about experiences. It's not about being treated fairly and rightly and good. That's just a ruse, is what he's saying. It's really about trying to take your money. They want your pocketbook. That's what he's saying. That's what this book is saying. That's what he's quoting. And then he's going to get down to the bottom and he say, so do we get equity of outcomes? And so equity of outcomes is going to make it sound like everybody should have the same thing, which again is not, which I don't believe is what social justice is attempting to do. Again, social justice is about pursuing that which is right, that which is appropriate, that which is ideal for society in a given social context.
Have you heard of this? Equality normally meant equality of opportunity. For example, prior to 1964, blacks and other minorities did not have equality of opportunity because there were Jim Crow laws in place to keep that down. Now, at least on paper anyway, those laws were done away with in 1964. And so we had equality of opportunity, but that did not mean equality of outcome. In fact, the word that is now used for equality of outcome is a word called equity. Have you heard this? Equity. What about equity?
Okay, so now we have introduced our next four-letter word, which is equity. And so equity, he's allowed to take the full, the furthest definition possible of equity. So equity doesn't mean that everybody has the same thing. It means that they have the same shot and that the outcomes are comparable, to each other. So we all know that if we go to a baseball stadium, right, and we buy tickets, that some seats are better than other seats. And we don't expect that to be unjust. We paid the money for the sort of seat that we bought, and the more money you pay, the better your seat is, and that's not unfair. There's no one in the social justice conversation who would say that is not fair. No one is saying that we should all be able to go to the baseball game and see have the exact same experience. We all do expect to experience a baseball game, though. Don't give me a seat where I'm standing behind a wall where I can't see the game. That would be unfair. But if I can buy a seat that actually allows me to see the game, I will take the experience that I'm paying for. No one's saying that. What we are saying, though, is if I buy a courtside seat and Frank Turek buys a courtside seat, that our experiences should be equitable. That the money I paid for the seat right next to the money he paid, that we should have an equitable, comparable experience. That whatever he's put in, that result that he's getting back, that there should be some comparable results with that, right? And if there isn't, then something's wrong with that. That means either the price of the seat needs to change or something, right? That this isn't right. Equitable is about those who are having is about those who are working and producing similar type of effort, working through a similar type of process, but getting different results. Now, even in America, right? Even in, like, say, the business world, right? This gets a little complicated because I'm a nonprofit. I'm a part of 3 nonprofits right now. And boy, the amount of work, when people come to me talking about meritocracy, right? What they're saying, man, you get what you deserve. You work hard, you get where you're going to go. Well, I know a lot of nonprofit people who work extremely hard, who are spending a lot of their hours, 40, 50 hours a week, doing things for free or for very low pay, nowhere near getting paid what they are supposed to be paid, what they would merit, what they would deserve, right? And that's not equitable. And we understand that that's just the way it is. That's no one's saying that's not necessarily fair, but we understand that that's not equitable. We understand that equity is not the thing of getting everyone the exact same thing. Social justice, though, there are a few things in society that should be equitable. There are a few things that everyone should have a pretty similar experience. When I get stopped by the police and when you get stopped by the police, if we act the same way, we should have the same experience, right? And if we don't act the same way, we should have the same experience. So forth and so on. So there are spaces where equity is there, and the the conversation around equity leads us to disparities, and the conversation around disparities has to do with, well, we'll see if we get there, has to do with being able to prove the elusive charge of racism, which is where equity plays a part. But I don't think that social justice is relying as heavily on equity as he is purporting. Socialism, as the pure form of socialism, does rely on equity, and I can see where you would be leery of that. But that's not what social justice is about.
Equity is everybody should wind up in the same place.
No, disagree.
With the same stuff.
Disagree.
Regardless of behavior.
Disagree. That's not at all the way people are talking about equity. That is the extremist, most broadest application of equity in a society. And it's irresponsible. Again, it's irresponsible to say that, because that's not how social justice is being talked about.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, equity.
So here's the straw man.
Never happened in the history of the world.
So now we're about to burn the straw man.
It's never going to happen in the future of the world. It's not even going to happen in heaven.
I would disagree with that as well. First of all, I don't think he has any stand to say what will happen in heaven, but I don't. But well, he's about to try to make. Let's see what he's doing here.
You say, what do you mean it's not going to happen in heaven? Everyone's going to get into heaven based on grace, but you're going to get different rewards, or rewards taken away from you based on negative behavior, right? You get into heaven based on grace, but you're judged in heaven based on your works.
Wow.
And thankfully, people like the Apostle Paul will get more works than the garden, or more rewards than the garden variety Christian, because it's just, he should. Think of the parable of the talents. What does Jesus do?
Wow.
He talks about the parable. You know the story, right? He gives 5 to one, 2 to another, and 1 to the third. And to the 5 who goes out and multiplies them, he commends. To the 2, same. To the 1 who hid it, he says, I'm going to take your talent and give it to the one that has more. That's the opposite of equity, friends. That's justice.
Okay. Now, if he's going to use, that's justice. Whoo! If he's going to use scripture, then he's got to also deal with the parable where the owner of the field pays a wage to the worker that works all day, and then pays the same wage to the worker that doesn't work all day. And the worker that comes and has worked all day says, "Hey, that's not fair. I should get more." And then, of course, the worker said, the field owner in the parable is like, "Look, I do what I want to do with what I have." You got to reconcile these two parables. I don't think the parable of the talents is about meritocracy. And I think that Frank needs to be really careful about applying the American meritorious way of thinking to the heaven state, if you will. I have a lot to say about this, and we're not going to go there. But again, he's imagining that a kind of capitalism is what's going to exist in heaven. At least it seems like he's headed that way. And the reality is that whenever God has started something new, whether it's the Garden of Eden, whether it's Pentecost, and even the pictures that we see in heaven at the end, Jesus is saying, hey, the way he operates has so little to do with meritocracy. He gives Adam a garden that he didn't work for and says, eat of anything except for this one thing. He says, all is yours, but none of it is yours. Right? He gets to the guy at the cross, and he says, today you're going to be with me in paradise, which I guess is what you're saying. Hey, he can get into heaven with grace, but then he's going to live in the slums of heaven, is what you're saying, because he got saved in the last minute. He's in the slums of heaven because his rewards will be less, whatever slums might mean, whatever wealth might mean in heaven. He'll have the least of it, and Paul will have the greater of it, because Paul was a better human than this is what Frank is saying. No, again, justice is not about getting what you deserve. This is the problem with his definition. He said it at the end of that. He says, that's justice. No, justice is that everyone has their role to play and everyone is doing what they are intended to do. It has nothing to do with status and stratosphere and resource hierarchies. The fact that you're going to apply the American meritocracy to the heavenly way of being, I think, is a stretch.
We're going to get justice in heaven based on our works. And there are 1,000 different reasons why people.
Wow. Frank, all of our righteousness. I know that Paul talks about crowns and rewards. I think you got to be careful here.
Come to different outcomes. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here. How many people have a brother or sister?
Wow.
Okay, adult brother or sister.
I'm very surprised that Frank
question.
said that.
Does your adult brother or sister, is he or she in the exact place you are in terms of finances, in terms of relationships, in terms of spiritual growth, in terms of health? No.
Once again, social justice is not talking about that. Social justice is about experiences, opportunities, and rights. We should all have equitable rights, equitable experiences, equitable opportunities based on the choices that we make. There's no one, social justice wise, no one is expecting that the criminal would have the same lifestyle of the non-criminal. That's not what social justice is saying. Social justice doesn't say, you know what, well, let's make sure that the prisoner and the person who followed all the law has the exact same things. To assume this broad application of equity is to dismiss the rationality of someone who's trying to understand how to get a society where it's supposed to be. It's to assume that the only thing they want is what they don't earn. And to let that assumption have such strength in the conversation that you can't hear or allow the limited application of what they're talking about to the civil space. I'm not saying that there's some people out there who have misinformation or misidentified ideas around equity. What I am saying is to say, hey, social justice people want equity. They want everyone to have the same thing. And then to say, do you live the same way as your brother and sister? That's not what we're talking about. And again, I'm surprised these people who show an inability to understand the nuance of these conversations are surprising to me. Frank is normally someone who I would expect to think a little more discriminately about it.
If you're not going to get equity of outcome from people born to the same parents under the same roof, how are you going to expect to get equity of outcome from people from different parents under different roofs? You're not.
Okay, so I'd like to quickly reiterate that we have moved away from social justice being about opportunities, and we've made it again about resources. And we're about to spend probably the next 8 minutes listening to this. I'm gonna cut in far less. We're gonna, or however long much time we have left in this video, 4 minutes. We're gonna spend the next 4 minutes listening to him talk about social justice as a resource conversation when it's not a resource conversation.
because there are so many choices that are made. There are so many motivations that some have that others don't. There are so many other factors that go into where you wind up in life, and it has nothing to do with discrimination. Now, I'm not saying discrimination doesn't occur or hasn't occurred. I'm not saying that. The idea, however, that differences of outcome are all due to discrimination is demonstrably false.
Okay, there we are. So he's talking about disparities, which is a disparity is the example of the difference of outcome. And his statement there, again, broad application. His statement is the presence of disparity. He didn't say disparity. I'm saying disparity, but the presence of difference of outcome doesn't always mean discrimination. We would agree with that. As someone who fights for social justice, I'm saying we because I would agree with that. I'm not a CRT guy, but I would agree with the fact that, sure, disparities don't always equal disparities are not always the proof of discrimination. But I would also say that discrimination always produces disparities. And so if you're looking, not all smoke comes from fire, but all fire produces smoke, right? If you want to use the deal. So you say, man, where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, sometimes what you thought was smoke wasn't smoke, but so forth and so on, right? And there's some things in disparities that is smoke that, it looks like it could be something, but it isn't. But I can tell you this, whenever discrimination is happening, the way to prove it is in the disparities. And most people are not just grabbing any old disparity, one-time occurrence, and saying, oh, this is the proof of discrimination. What they're grabbing is trending disparities that happen over time and in multiple versions of itself that create a picture that makes it suspicious that discrimination is there, that makes it probable cause that discrimination has occurred. Discrimination in itself being something that's intangible and hard to point out in real time. The only way to point out or contend with or discover where discrimination is to find the disparities where they are and question them and determine whether those disparities are actually the result of discrimination. Listen, if I am suspicious that my wife is cheating on me with another man, then when I put my ear to the door and hear her talking to another guy, that might be one piece of evidence for her for her cheating on me. Now, does that mean that every time she talks on the phone with another guy that means that she's cheating on me? No. But it does mean that if she is cheating on me, she's probably talking to another guy sometimes. Therefore, her talking to another guy sometimes, her meeting with another guy sometimes, her showing up and a series of activities that on their own don't always mean that she's cheating on me could be put together to make the case that, hey, you might want to check to make sure that she's not cheating on you, because these are also things that people who cheat on their husbands or their wives do. Disparity is not the silver bullet for the social justice. Disparity is the smoke, not the fire. What it is, hey, we see trending disparities in this area, and it makes us suspicious that discrimination is there. Let's discover what that is. That's what disparity is about. So Frank and I agree that disparities is not the end all be all of discovering discrimination, but it is something that can be used as a proof.
And Ibram Kendi, you may have heard that name, who's a race scholar up in Boston, said that all disparities between the ethnic groups, between the races, 100% of them are due to discrimination. That is the most illogical statement that he probably has ever made.
If Ibram X. Kendi said that, I would agree that was an extremely illogical statement, and I would disagree with Ibram X. Kendi.
Some might be because of discrimination, but certainly not all, because people make different decisions. They have different talents.
But Frank, so the ones that aren't are not the problem. How would you go about discovering the ones that are? That's my question. Right now, you're defending against disparities because you say they're not useful to discovering discrimination. But our goal should be to alleviate discrimination. So, what would be the proof of discrimination? And what would you use to reveal it as something that needs to be dealt with? And is disparity useful in some cases and not all? Now, he said it is in some, and he's conceding that, but his presentation is speaking against social justice altogether.
They have different gifts, they have different interests, different motivations, maybe different breaks in life. You're never going to get equal outcome. We're looking for equal opportunity under the law, not equal outcome by the law.
Agreed. I'm in agreement with that.
Now, let's unpack this oppressor thing for a minute. This, in my view, is the key to this kind of approach. Or this is the poison pill of critical theory. And when I say critical theory, I don't just mean critical race theory. Critical theory is a idea that includes critical race theory, but it's also critical queer theory. And there's critical pedagogy theory, and there's all sorts of critical theories.
Right.
It's not just race theory. And what they say is the world is divided up into the oppressed and the oppressor. This comes from Marx, as you
pause. They don't say the world is, they say a given society is divided up into oppressed and oppressor. And it's an unfortunate language, but it's really what it means is the power, those who have lots of power and influence. Let's not use power because power sounds lots of influence, and those who have little influence, those who have lots of means and connections, and those who have little means and connections. You just laid out the fact that everyone is not equitable, that everyone's experience is not equitable, which means that there are going to be some people who make really great decisions and therefore ascend to places of wealth and influence and power. And there are going to be some who don't. So it's a given society that is inequitable will have at least two different influence groups of people who can influence the way things happen, the way laws are passed, the way decisions are made socially. And the oppressed oppressor, which again is probably distractive language because oppressed has such a negative vibe to it. The oppressed assumes that those with more power and more influence are feeding off of those who don't have that power influence in order to keep their power influence. Those who have power or those who have influence and means are concerned with protecting their influence and means from those who don't. And therefore, they hold down or hold away or separate themselves or create systems that protect themselves from those who would come to take away their power and their influence. That's the general thinking of oppressed and oppressor, of this sort of dichotomy. I can't think of a scenario in our country, in the world, where there isn't a difference between those who have influence and those who don't. And where you'd have to show me a place in the world where everyone has the exact same level of influence. Everyone has the exact same level of wealth. If that's not true, then by definition, you have those who have and those who have not, because it's not equitable, right? And then the question becomes, well, what is the dynamic of those who have in relationship to those who don't have? How much more influence do those who have possess over those who don't have in the scheme of how a given society run, whether it's America or wherever else. And if the decision making and influence of those who have is designed to keep those who don't have from having too much, then it's oppressive, meaning it is by definition keeping a particular demographic of people in a certain spot. Now that need not be fully nefarious. But it is a dynamic that's inescapable. You either have those who have major influence helping those who don't have major influence, or you have those who have major influence protecting themselves from those. I think those are the only two options here on that. And so while oppression did look like slavery and all that stuff in the past, oppression doesn't have to have those extreme forms. It just has to have the idea that I'm not going to let you get beyond a certain point, or I'm going to build things in such a way where you can't get beyond a certain point, where I'm going to protect myself and my interests from you. And in that sense, social oppression is alive and well in almost every society in the world. And you don't need to be Karl Marx to realize this. Again, oppressed and oppressor showed up way before Marx showed up. Oppressed and oppressor showed up in Exodus when Egypt was oppressing the Israelites. And throughout the scripture, we see the oppressed and oppressor in action in one form or another. The Jews in Jesus' day would have called themselves oppressed, but in what ways? They were oppressed because they couldn't get beyond a certain station with Rome, not because they were enslaved, right? So this concept of oppressed and oppressor and it being Marxian, and that therefore making it the most heinous and satanic thing ever there was, is part of the problem with this whole conversation.
And here are all of the people who are oppressed: peoples of color, poor middle class, women, trans, LGBT, non-Christians, disabled, immigrants, and indigenous people. And this, by the way, this is from a book on critical race theory, okay?
Right. So these are all the people of color, poor, middle class. These are all the people who the American, according to this critical theory, right? Because he said the world, but then he lists these things, and these are all American. This is the American criticism. This isn't the world criticism. So we can't say critical theories about the world and then bring in the evaluation of America into it. But this is the American evaluation. And in critical theory, what they're saying is those people who have the least amount of influence on the way things happen and therefore can create ways to lock people out, those people are not the people of color in general as a concept, as a group. These are not the people of color, the middle class, the women, so forth, the people that not able-bodied. And in America, certainly not the non-Christians, immigrants, indigenous. These are not the people with the influence, is what they're saying. You call it oppressed. These are not the people with the influence, and these are the people who are the law has put a ceiling on, is what they're saying. Right? That's what this is.
Critical theory. Now, who would be the oppressor of these people?
Now, the oppressor makes it sound like villainous, and this is where white America has a really hard time accepting that they do things wrong. So, in my opinion, many in white America. And so whenever you offer some sort of villainous sort of title like oppressor or anything like that, immediately defensive comes up, which is why I think the oppressed and the oppressor is the wrong sort of language here. What we're talking about is those who have and those who have not wealth and influence. And the oppressed are the people who don't have influence and don't have wealth. And the oppressor I would change this chart to say those who generally as a group do have influence and do have wealth. And so when you look at these two charts, if you replace oppressed and oppressor with influence and means, then again, and think about it in groups instead of individuals, then you'll see how this was come to be in the American context. Certainly in days past, it was this way. And it's still this way today, even if it's decreasingly so.
Well, whites are oppressors. Owning class are oppressors. Men are oppressors of women and trans. Heterosexuals are oppressors of LGB. Christians are oppressors of non-Christians. I wonder if that's true in Saudi Arabia. You think it is?
Once again, this critique is about America, not about the world.
No, okay. Abled are oppressors of disabled. Citizens are oppressors of immigrants. This is why people don't want to have border security. You see how all this goes together? And white settlers are the oppressors of indigenous people.
Okay, he should have went on and settled with white settlers are oppressors of indigenous people. They were, by definition, by the worst versions of that. True to that. But again, what he's resisting is this negative, villainous title of oppressor, right? But again, if you put the proper titles here, and you say, again, the oppressed, in the oppressed column, instead of saying oppressed, you say, as a group, these are the people who don't have means, don't have influence. And then you put it into the power in the oppressor column, you say these are the people who do have means and do have influence. Then it begins to make sense. There are more white people with means and influence than there are people of color. There are more owning class people with means and influence than those who are poor and middle class. There are more men who have means and influence in our society than there are women and trans. There are more heterosexuals who have means and influence than there are LGBT. There are more Christians in America who have means and influence in America than non-Christians. There are more able-bodied people who get to make decisions and have means and influence than disabled. There are more citizens in America who have means and influence than immigrants. There are more white settlers. Actually, this white settlers and this indigenous people thing shouldn't even fit in this category. But there are more white settlers in the American story who seized means and influence from the indigenous people. This is the way this works out, right? So it is in an inequitable society, somebody's going to have more means and influence than someone else. By your definition of inequity, and that you spent the last 10 minutes trying to help us understand, then that means that there are going to be these dichotomies, at minimum dichotomies of influence. And so then the question becomes, well, if these people have means and influence, what do they do with that means and those influences? And do they just live regularly, or do they live so self-motivated that they care only about their stuff and not the affairs of other people, and in so doing, locking them out of a way to get out of their current stratus of means and influence?
Seems to me that if we're going to group people like this and treat people according to their group without any reference to their behavior, that is racism, sexism, and bigotry itself.
Okay, so what we're doing, though, is not what he just described. So if we understand it the way I've described it, as means and influence, then when we think about these people over on the left side who don't have means and don't have influence, and we say, okay, how do we make sure that their rights are protected and that their opportunities are plenteous and that their experiences are not discriminatory, then we are making sure that those people who cannot speak for themselves and do not have enough of advocacy power, efficacy, in their hands, how do we make sure that they are experiencing all the things that they should experience, right? And because those are the people who are most likely not to experience those things. Those are the people most likely to be discriminated against, or most likely to have their rights violated, or so forth and so on. And then when the reports start to bear that out, when the disparity reports start to bear that out, you start to question and bring those things up. What we're not doing is saying, man, simply because you're a person of color, we're going to treat you a certain way. We're relating that person of color's connectivity to where they fit into society, into this social concept of influence and means.
That's what we're trying to get away from, right? Aren't we trying to get away from this? Don't we want to treat people based on the content of their character, not the group they're in?
Sure.
This,
yes.
For me, and this we'll see here in just a minute, is called intersectionality. We'll get to it in more detail.
It is.
But this idea that there are these two groups and we must treat people based on where they are in the group is exactly what we want to avoid. This is what we're trying to get away from.
No, it's not treating people a certain way. Simply it's trite to say treating people based on where they are. What it is understanding the dynamic of society and understanding that the tendency is that for those who have influence and means, the tendency for that group is to feed on that from the other group that doesn't have. And identifying with those who have little influence, or rather identifying those who have little influence and little means, identifying those people and being sensitive to where they are in relationship to society is what we're doing. It's a little bit like caring for the least of these, and the least of these are the could be the children, but it could be anyone who is on the least side of the social scale, right? And he said, listen, we got to care especially for them. No one has ever, the Bible doesn't tell us to care for the rich, because or the wealthy or those who have power. We pray for them, but the mandates are always to those who have less, because they have less and because they have little means and influence. And there is a special mandate, a special commandment, a special attention given to that group of people, and protecting and advocating for those things.
We're trying to treat people as individuals.
We're not
by the group they're in.
We treat people by both.
What does the culture mean by social justice? It means that we got to take from these people and give to these people. We've got to.
Okay, so once again, he thinks that social justice is about taking resources from the right people, the people on the right, and giving it to the people on the left, which is not what that is.
Take power. This is a power play, by the way. Take power away from anybody over here and give it to these people. That's why, in fact, some of you may have been sitting in here when I first got up, and you probably thought, what? How can a white guy talk about critical race theory? If you thought that for even a split second, you've already bought into critical race theory. Because arguments don't have race. Arguments don't have ethnicity. But this theory says that these people, since they have an oppressed experience, ought to be listened to, and they carry more gravitas with them than these people. Don't listen to these people. Only listen to these people.
No, what it says is that the people on the left have equal amount of gravitas as the people on the right, and that the experiences of these people on the left should be a part of the conversation and not completely dismissed, which is what many want to do. As I've said before, I can be a doctor and learn everything there is to learn about giving birth, but I think I have a little bit more to learn from a woman who's given birth. There's something about her experience that I'm never going to understand beyond her trying to tell me about it. I'm not going to be able to read about that. I'm not going to be able to study that my way into that. Now, does her experience as a woman giving birth negate the things that I've learned? No. The truth is they both are next to each other. They both are part of understanding birth. And what we have heard in the past is that these people on the right, the white owning, these people on the right have held the default authority of what is right and what is good and what is true without the experiences being talked about by those people who are on the left. So once again, the extreme language of don't listen at all to people on the right, just to people on the left, that's not the conversation that social justice people are having.
So,
okay, and I think that's the end of this video. I spent a lot more time on this video than I thought. That was just a 10-minute video that we spent a lot on. But so unfortunately, it looks like Frank has fallen to the same trap that evangelical people continue to fall in. The redefinition of social justice is the first problem. Really, the definition of justice is the first problem. Then the redefinition of social justice is the second problem. And then the resistance to understanding the makeup of society and how influence and means affects the way people deal with other people is the other resistance. And I think this whole thing is meant to deal with two fears that I find in most of the white Americans who, and really anybody, but particularly the white Americans who I come across with, white Christian Americans who I come across with that kind of resist this thing. The two fears that I think they have is you're going to make me the bad guy and you're going to take what I have. And the resistance to the social justice movement will always has almost every time landed on the defense that I'm not nearly as bad as you're making me. I don't want the title of the bad guy. And I don't want you to come and take the stuff that I've earned. And what they miss is that that the conversation doesn't require them to be the bad guy per se. That a lot of the conversation is about understanding the season that we're in and trying to help realize the American ideal, the American justice ideal, from where we are today, and for them to use their space in society, that influence and means, to help us do so. And in that sense, white America doesn't have to be the villain at all. In fact, they could be the hero. Because if the white, rich, whatever, if this thing is true, that the means and the influence reside largely on one side of this table that he made, then should they decide instead to not protect themselves from those who don't have means and power, but pursue a society where discrimination has no home, then we can make a significant difference. But right now we can't decide on whether the problem is a problem because we can't decide on whose fault it is. When particularly me, I don't really care whose fault it is. We are where we are. We've made great progress as an American church to deal with race and discrimination and the poor, but we're not done yet. The work's not done yet. Let's be inspired by the progress we've made in the past, pass the baton, and keep moving forward toward the ideal. Let's not act like we've arrived and that suddenly we no longer live in a racialized world, a class where there's a wealthy and a middle. It's funny. We politically, we understand the top 1%, the wealthy class, the middle class, and the poor class, but we can't get our heads wrapped around oppressed and oppressor because it sounds negative. And I think we ought to be sophisticated enough. We don't need it to be oppressed and oppressor. We ought to be sophisticated enough to talk about these things and get the problem resolution. But unfortunately, it seems that we have a really hard time doing that. If you hung out with us for the entirety of this, thanks for hanging out. Check out the rest of Frank Turek. I suspect that I'm going to disagree with a lot what he has to say, but I'm always one to let you listen to and engage whatever that you engage with. And I think Frank is a thoughtful guy, and he will probably give you some good things to think about. So go ahead and check out his video. And who knows, maybe I'll grab another piece of the video and do something else later. You guys have a good rest of the day, and I will see you when I see you. Peace out.